The ocean, a vast, indifferent titan, had long ceased its tempestuous rage, settling into a deceptive calm that belied the recent cataclysm. Manuel Castro, lashed to the shattered mainmast of the Santa Maria, felt the relentless sun beat down upon his exposed skin, a slow, agonizing roast after days of saltwater immersion. His tongue, a swollen, useless thing, cleaved to the roof of his mouth, each breath a rasping testament to his dwindling vitality. The waves, once mountainous predators, now merely nudged his fragile raft, a mocking cradle rocking him towards an unknown fate. Around him, the flotsam of his former life, splintered planks, a lone barnacle-encrusted barrel, drifted like epitaphs to a lost voyage. Hope, that most tenacious of human illusions, had long since abandoned him, leaving only a hollow, echoing chamber of pure, primal will to survive. Then a miracle. A low-lying smudge on the horizon, too dark and stable for a cloud, too defiant for a wave. Land. The word, a silent, desperate prayer, ignited a flicker of life in his desiccated veins. He tore at the knots binding him, his fingers clumsy and raw, propelled by a sudden, desperate surge of adrenaline. A piece of driftwood, smooth and worn by countless currents, became his lifeline, and with a ragged, guttural cry, he began to kick, a frantic, almost ritualistic rhythm against the immense indifference of the Pacific. The current, a benevolent anomaly, seemed to embrace him, guiding him towards the burgeoning green against the blue, the high volcanic peaks, shrouded in an ethereal mist, beckoning like ancient silent guardians. The last thing he recalled before the blessed darkness claimed him was the agonizing scrape of sharp coral against his flayed skin, the metallic taste of his own blood mingling with the salt, and the indescribable relief of solid, though painful, ground beneath his emaciated body. He drifted back to consciousness, to a symphony of soft, unfamiliar voices, a gentle rhythmic murmur that seemed to hum in the very air around him. A cool, sweet liquid touched his parched lips, followed by the pulpy texture of fruit. He forced his eyelids open, blinking against the muted, dappled light filtering through the woven pandanus leaves of a low-slung hut. Dark, concerned faces, adorned with intricate swirling tattoos and vibrant hibiscus flowers, peered down at him. They were Polynesians, their features broad and placid, their eyes a deep, liquid brown, conveying an unnerving stillness. A profound disorientation, colder than any sea spray, shivered through his weakened frame. He was undeniably safe, yet utterly and terrifyingly adrift in a foreign reality. For weeks, Castro recuperated under the watchful yet strangely detached care of the Tararoa tribe in their secluded village of Te Oro. His days were a blur of enforced rest, light, unfamiliar foods, and the gradual reacquaintance with the rhythms of a body brought to the brink. He absorbed their language, a melodic stream of vowels and soft consonants, word by painful word, piecing together their customs through observation and halting questions. They were unfailingly kind, sharing their meagre resources, offering him shelter and a quiet, unassuming camaraderie. Yet beneath this veneer of idyllic island life, Castro, a man of the sea accustomed to discerning subtle shifts, perceived an undercurrent, a disquieting deviation from the boisterous warmth he had encountered in other Pacific islands. There was a peculiar, almost preternatural stillness about them, their movements unhurried, their smiles often serene, but their eyes, though gentle, frequently held a distant, knowing depth that belied their outward simplicity. Their reverence for the sea bordered on obsession. More than a provider of sustenance, it was treated as a living, sentient entity. Its moods appeased with daily offerings of exotic fruits and meticulously carved wooden effigies cast into the waves at the cusp of twilight. He learned of their ancestral beliefs, a tapestry of benevolent land spirits and powerful sky gods, but his attention was increasingly drawn to hushed whispers of other entities, older, deeper, more primal. They spoke in reverent, almost fearful tones of Cthulhu, a name that resonated with a guttural, almost liquid power, and of R'lyeh, a sunken city, cyclopean and forgotten, where these beings slept, dreaming, awaiting a time of awakening. The elders, especially old Puah, a wizened figure with eyes clouded by cataracts and hands gnarled like ancient mangrove roots, spoke of these things with a chilling blend of fear and devotional awe. "They wait," Puah would intone, his voice a dry rustle of papyrus, beyond the sight of mortal men, dreaming beneath the black waters, and their dreams touch our minds like the deepest currents. Castro, a pragmatist hardened by years of navigating treacherous waters and the stark realities of life at sea, initially dismissed these tales as quaint superstitions, the poetic fears of an isolated people. He had survived typhoons and rogue waves, cutthroat pirates and drunken brawls in portside taverns. He was not a man to believe in sea monsters. But the pervasive nature of the belief, its insidious seep into every facet of Tararoa life, began to gnaw at him. Even the children, their innocent voices echoing the unsettling reverence of their elders, spoke of sleepers and dreamers who dwelled in the abyss. He began to notice the swirling, tentacled motifs that adorned their bodies, tattooed with meticulous precision, seeming to writhe on their dark skin. He saw the unusual idols, carved not from familiar wood, but from a dark, unknown stone, their surfaces slick and cold to the touch. These figures were neither fish nor human, but an unholy amalgamation. Bulbous heads with vaguely bat-like wings and eyes deep-set, radiating an alien, malevolent intelligence. These were not the friendly, stylized tikis of other islands. These evoked a primal atavistic dread that prickled the hairs on his arms. His attempts to probe Puah further were met with frustrating evasions, or sometimes a chilling, knowing smile that seemed to see directly into the turmoil of Castro's soul. "The truths of the deep," Puah once said, his voice imbued with an ancient weariness, "are not for those who cling to the sun's fleeting warmth. They come in their own time, when the sleeper stirs and the stars are right." Castro tried desperately to rationalize it all. Perhaps a unique artistic style, an elaborate myth born of millennia of isolation and the vast, terrifying emptiness of the Pacific. But the logical explanations felt increasingly flimsy, like a tattered sail against the overwhelming conviction of the Tararoa. A gnawing curiosity mixed with an insistent growing unease began to take root in his soul, a seed of doubt that threatened to unravel the comfortable certainties of his world. He found himself watching the vast expanse of the ocean with new eyes, not just as a means of escape, but as an inscrutable, menacing canvas hiding unimaginable secrets. He felt a growing sense of being observed, not by the villagers, but by something far more ancient, immense, and patient. One evening, as the moon, a slender sliver of silver, hung low over the western horizon, a low, guttural chanting drifted from the direction of the village's farthest cove. It was a sound unlike any he had heard from the Tararoa. deeper, more primal, edged with a strange hypnotic rhythm that resonated in his bones. Castro's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drum in the suffocating silence of his hut. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was what Pua had alluded to. This was the dark core of their faith. He crept from his hut, propelled by an irresistible morbid curiosity, his bare feet silent on the warm sand. The air grew heavy, thick with the cloying scent of night-blooming tropical flowers, and something else, something metallic and faintly putrid, a smell like stagnant seawater and ancient blood. He peered through a thicket of tangled palms, his breath catching in his throat, at a scene that would forever scar the landscape of his memory. Perhaps 24 villagers, their faces painted with stark, phosphorescent white clay, swayed in unison around a roughly hewn stone altar, its surface dark and gleaming under the nascent moonlight. On the altar, glistening wetly, lay a colossal still creature, a giant squid or octopoid of unbelievable size, its enormous lidless eyes glazed in death, its tentacles splayed in a grotesque fan-like array. Pua, standing at the head of the altar, his gaunt frame strangely energized, raised an obsidian dagger, its polished surface reflecting the faint starlight. His voice, amplified by the night, led the chant, a series of guttural intonations that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality, a blasphemous litany that vibrated with an unholy power. Funglui mgluinaf Cthulhu relie wugahnagel ftagn. The words, alien and terrifying, resonated with a power that shook Castro to his very core, vibrating not just in his ears, but in the marrow of his bones. Then, with a swift, practiced movement, Pua plunged the obsidian dagger deep into the creature's mantle, and a thick, inky fluid, black as the deepest abyss, erupted onto the altar, pooling around the monstrous form. A collective gasp, a sound of ecstasy and profound terror, escaped the assembled villagers. They began to anoint themselves with the black ichor, smearing it on their faces, their chests, their arms, their eyes rolling back in their heads in a grotesque display of rapture. Their movements became frenzied, a grotesque, writhing dance of devotion and madness, their bodies contorting in unnatural ways. Castro watched, transfixed by a horror that defied belief. A revulsion so profound it made his stomach clench and bile rise in his throat. These were not simple islanders. They were cultists, their faith steeped in something ancient, blasphemous, and utterly inhuman. He wanted to scream, to tear himself away, to flee into the merciful darkness, to denounce their madness with every fibre of his being, but a paralyzing fear held him captive, rooted to the spot. He was alone, utterly isolated, stranded among them, an unwitting, unwilling witness to a dark sacrament. The chants swelled, reaching a fever pitch, a cacophony of inhuman sound, and then, as if on cue, the moon disappeared behind a sudden bank of impossibly dark clouds. The cove plunged into near-total darkness, illuminated only by the faint phosphorescent glow emanating from the sacrificed creature and the glint of the cultists' ecstatic, vacant eyes. The sounds changed, too. The human voices seemed to intertwine with something else, a deep, rhythmic throbbing that pulsed from the ocean itself, a subterranean heartbeat that resonated in Castro's very bones, a sound that spoke of unimaginable depths and slumbering, malevolent consciousness. When the ritual subsided, and the moon, a pale, anemic disk, reappeared from behind the clouds, the villagers dispersed, their faces now calm, almost serene, yet their eyes retained that unnerving, distant knowingness, a reflection of the cosmic truth they had just communed with. Castro, trembling uncontrollably, his mind a maelstrom of terror and incomprehension, crept back to his hut. He could not sleep. The guttural chants, the colossal tentacled creature, the black ichor, the inhuman thrum from the abyssal sea. It all played over and over in his mind, shattering the comfortable certainties of his world, fragmenting his sanity piece by agonizing piece. Escape became his sole desperate thought. But the island was small, the ocean vast and unforgiving, and he was surrounded. He was a fly caught in a spider's web, and the web was woven of cosmic dread. The next morning his dread was compounded by an unexpected visit from Pua. The old man sat opposite him, his milky eyes seeming to pierce through Castro's physical form, seeing directly into the depths of his shaken soul. "You witnessed," Pua stated, his voice devoid of accusation, simply articulating a fact that needed no confirmation. Castro could only nod, his throat dry, his voice lost. "It is the way, the truth. It has always been so, before the coming of your gods, before your ships plied these ephemeral waters. Before man clawed his way from the primordial ooze, they dreamed." Pua explained patiently, softly, the terrifying philosophy of the great old ones. He spoke of a time when they ruled, when consciousness was a fluid, permeable thing, when dimensions bled into one another, and reality was a far more malleable, terrifying concept. He spoke of their slumber, their dreams echoing through the void, subtly influencing the minds of men, driving some to madness, others to revelation. Humanity, Pua argued, was but a fleeting dust mote in the grand, terrifying cosmic scheme, a brief, insignificant flicker of sentience destined to be snuffed out like a candle in a gale when the old ones awakened. "The fear you feel," Pua continued, his voice a sibilant whisper, "is the fear of a small thing confronting the infinite, of a fleeting thought grappling with eternal truth. But there is also liberation in understanding. To know that our petty struggles, our fleeting joys, our transient sorrows mean nothing against the vastness is to be truly free. To embrace the inevitable, to prepare for the return, is the only wisdom that endures." Castro listened, horrified, repulsed, yet a part of him, a small, insidious, increasingly dominant part, began to listen. The logic, twisted and blasphemous though it was, had a terrible, undeniable coherence, a gravitational pull that drew his fragmented mind towards it. The world he knew, the world of ordered religion and human dominion, suddenly felt fragile, a thin, transparent veil over an abyss of unimaginable chaos. He had seen the proof, felt the ancient power in the chants, heard the throbbing from the deep. How could he deny what his own senses, however terror-stricken, had witnessed? Days turned into weeks, and Castro's resistance, once a defiant roar, slowly eroded into a whimper, then into silence. He was given tasks, not as a captive, but as a burgeoning initiate, a fledgling cultist. He learned to etch the complex, non-Euclidean symbols onto rough stone tablets, their angles subtly wrong, twisting the eye, subtly warping the mind. He participated in the communal fishing, but now he saw the creatures of the deep not just as food, but as pale, grotesque echoes of something greater, something immense and submerged, stirring in the lightless abysses. He was shown artifacts, grotesque idols of Cyclopean design, crafted from materials unknown to any earthly geology, their surfaces slick and strangely warm. He touched them and felt a strange, cold energy hum beneath his fingertips, a faint, ancient echo of the distant drowned city. His dreams, once filled with nostalgic images of home, the familiar rolling deck of a ship, or the faces of forgotten lovers, became a terrifying kaleidoscopic landscape of non-Euclidean architecture, of colossal green-furred entities stirring in lightless depths, of chants echoing through an alien vacuum. He would wake in a cold sweat, the images burning in his mind, feeling an invisible pressure, a whisper at the very edge of his consciousness, a telepathic tendril brushing against his brain. The Taroa had not forced him into their dark devotion. They had simply enveloped him, slowly, inexorably, into their cosmic worldview, like a deep-sea current drawing a lost vessel into its inescapable embrace. He was shipwrecked not just on an island, but on a shore of sanity, adrift in a sea of madness and blasphemous revelation. He began to see the world through their eyes, a preparatory stage for the inevitable awakening, a grand, horrifying prelude. The initial horror, a scream trapped in his throat, had given way to a numb acceptance, and then a chilling, unwavering conviction. He was part of something vast, ancient, and utterly indifferent to humanity. The night of the Great Convergence arrived with a palpable, almost suffocating tension in the very air. The stars, usually a scattered diamond dust across the black velvet sky, seemed to coalesce into ominous patterns, constellations twisting into blasphemous forms known only to the cultists. The tide was unusually low, exposing vast stretches of black, slick rock formations along the coastline that ordinarily remained submerged, formations that hinted at Cyclopean architecture beneath the waves. The villagers, dressed in robes woven from dark, coarse fibres and adorned with strange phosphorescent patterns that seemed to pulse with an inner light, gathered at the largest cove, where an immense Cyclopean monolith stood, its surface carved with symbols that seemed to shift and writhe in the moonlight, blurring the edges of perception. Castro, now indistinguishable from the other initiates in his dark robes and painted face, moved with a strange, detached purpose. He felt the cold certainty settle in his heart, a quiet resignation to the cosmic truth. Pua stood before the monolith, his eyes no longer milky, but alight with an inner fire, burning with an ancient knowledge. His voice, now resonant and powerful, boomed as he led the congregation in the ancient unholy chant. Funglui Muguru Naf Cthulhu Relier Wogach Nagel Ftang. The words, once terrifying, flowed from Castro's own lips now, effortlessly, naturally, part of the swelling inhuman chorus. He was a conduit, a vessel. The chanting intensified, reaching a crescendo that vibrated not just in the air, but deep within his skull, threatening to burst his eardrums. The very ground seemed to tremble beneath his feet, a subterranean rumble that echoed the cosmic upheaval. From the exposed rock formations, a phosphorescent green light began to pulse, growing brighter, more intense, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like forgotten horrors against the jagged cliffs. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone, the abyssal depths, and something else, something metallic and cold, like the very vacuum of space. And then it came. Not a vision perceived with his mortal eyes, but a colossal, overwhelming impression slammed directly into his mind. It was an ancient, boundless consciousness, stirring in a slumber as vast as the universe itself. He saw, not with sight, but with pure, unmediated knowing, a city of impossible angles, titanic and black, rising from a green, preternatural ocean, its geometry defying all terrestrial logic. He felt the immeasurable weight of centuries, millennia, eons of dreaming, of malevolent anticipation. He tasted the salt and slime of unimaginable depths, the cold indifference of cosmic space, the sheer crushing pressure of oblivion. And at the heart of it all, a shape, immense, gelatinous, squamous, with a head like an octopus, a body like a dragon, and 1,000 writhing tentacles. Cthulhu. The entity's dream thoughts, not words but pure, incomprehensible concepts, flowed into his brain, overwhelming his human understanding, dissolving the boundaries of his individual self. We wait, we sleep, we shall rise, and the world shall be remade. Humanity is but a passing shadow. It was a symphony of madness and ultimate, terrifying truth. A revelation that obliterated the concept of individual self, dissolving it into a vast universal horror. Castro was but a tiny node, a fleeting conduit for the awakening Leviathan, utterly insignificant, yet profoundly, irreversibly changed. The raw, unfiltered power of it threatened to shatter his very being, to tear his mind apart. But then, as suddenly as it had come, the direct connection receded, leaving behind an echoing imprint, a profound emptiness, and an unshakable, terrifying certainty. The chanting faded into a satisfied hum, a low, guttural thrum that was more felt than heard. The phosphorescent glow dimmed, then vanished. The stars returned to their scattered, indifferent positions, no longer forming blasphemous patterns. Castro stood among the other cultists, his body trembling slightly. But his mind, now, was fundamentally different. His human fears and hopes had been consumed, purged by the cosmic fire, replaced by a cold, unwavering knowledge. He was no longer just Manuel Castro, the practical sailor of the Mediterranean. He was a keeper of the truth, a prophet of the cosmic nightmare, a fragment of humanity touched by the abyss. The dream of Cthulhu had touched him, left its indelible mark, and he would forever carry its chilling message, awaiting the day the stars were right, the day the sunken city would rise, and the old ones would reclaim their ancient terrible dominion. His terror had been replaced by a quiet, terrible acceptance, a chilling, serene surrender.